A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
I think it's completely ridiculous that video games are still having this conversation about whether or not video games are as addictive like tobacco.
Okay, so let me just say, first of all, that this idea didn't originally have anything to do with addiction. Though, obviously, you and I are going to talk about it as it does because that's really, I think, the big one today. But let's go back to how this started, right? So it started in, as much as America is divided today, long time ago in 2009, a Democrat and Republican figured out that they could agree on one thing, and that was that video games cause violence, right? And so this is where it originally came from, right? You had this bipartisan effort between Baca and Wolf, Democrat and Republican, that together tried to pass the Violence in Video Games Labeling Act in 2009. And this was, we'll talk about it in a minute, what this act was trying to do. But the point was labeling. And they failed, but I mean, they were really serious about this. So they tried again in 2011. They tried again in 2012. It was just that important to them. No, I don't want to say no one was buying it, but obviously it didn't get passed, right? And what was interesting about the Violence in Video Game Labeling Act is it made this explicit comparison between video games and tobacco, and included the demand for labels on video games that were really kind of similar, to the general warning labels that you see on packs of tobacco, right? So here's what Frank Wolf said, right? Just as we warn smokers of the health consequences of tobacco, we should warn parents and children about the growing scientific evidence demonstrating a relationship between violent video games and violent behavior. As a parent and grandparent, is it surprising that a grandparent would be making laws like this about games?
He was a grandparent at that point. He's
right. But is it surprising that someone who probably has very, very little experience with games would be making legislation like this?
Oh, right.
I think it's important people know everything they can about the extremely violent nature of some of these games, right? And the idea was that they were going to make this thing mandatory for everybody, right? So for all games, not just for violent games or not just for mature games, right? For all games that weren't like early childhood games, they were going to have the following warning. They were going to say, warning, exposure to violent video games has been linked to aggressive behavior. Even for nonviolent games,
right,
they all had to carry this label.
Right. So first off, that linking has been disproven. It's been debunked. So there is no link between video games and violent behavior, or I should say, there isn't any more of a link between video games and violent behavior than any other violent media and violent behavior. So that's a bit of a nuanced take on it, I understand, but video games don't actually make you more likely to be violent than, say, watching a violent movie.
Or rather, not more likely to become aggressive, right?
Sure.
But and let's really quick, right? Aggressiveness is, a lot less specific maybe than violence, right? So remember, right? The worry was,
and also not as condemned, right? We like certain kinds of aggressiveness.
Yeah, I mean, people love their football, right? MMA, right, is fun because of the aggression, right?
That's right.
And you would think if people play competitive games, especially, they would become more aggressive, right? But that doesn't mean that. Well, I don't know
I don't know that that's true. I don't know that follows.
You're right, and things like this need studies, right? So let's say around that time, and we got to remember this is 2009. Right, so we're not in today's space
right.
on this.
And you should know also that by 2009, this was they've been beating this horse for like 10 years.
Yes,
like this conversation had been going on for at least 10 years.
That is true, but at the same time, when the conversation started, there weren't a lot of studies on it. By this time, there were studies on it, and the studies did seem to show that there was a link to aggressive behavior. What they didn't show was that there was a link to violence, and people at the time were still essentially assuming, well, aggressive behavior, if someone's more aggressive, then they're probably more likely to go out and do things like shoot their school.
Right.
And they also didn't have this idea of aggression is one thing, violence is something else.
I think they did, but I think they were deliberately muddying those waters.
Okay. In fact, it's hard to believe they didn't see the difference between those two, at least the researchers.
Right.
But, here's how, I remember my favorite study on this, when I found out how they measured aggression, I think I literally laughed out loud. What they did is they had, I think the study went like this. They had a group of people that never played violent games. I think they hadn't played Call of Duty or something.
Okay.
Right? They never played violent games before, played 30 minutes of a violent game. And then they had other people who played things like Call of Duty or maybe just shooters as a kind of control group. And they did a bunch of things with them. And then they put them in a situation where they give them a simple game to play, and they gave them a way to distract their opponent by essentially pressing a button that would cause a loud buzzer or loud noise, right?
Okay.
To go in like the ears of their, the opponent, right? So I press a button, you get this big noise in your headphones, right, to distract you.
Okay.
And they
very
found
much like
out
that Simpsons, very first episode of Simpsons, where the family gets to electroshock each other.
I remember it. Oh God, I remember it very, very vaguely. But with the Simpsons, of course, it would end up different than in reality.
Right. It turns out they quite liked it.
Right, and so it turned out, right, in these studies, right, that the more the players played, like say these kinds of shooters, the more likely they were to use these loud noises.
Okay.
Right? And they said, well, that's aggression.
Oh, sure.
They're playing more aggressively. And you can see what that means, right? In a sense, it's more aggressive than maybe if the opposite is more passive, you're not distracting your player. Right? I don't know if passive versus aggressive or passive versus active. You might think that the people who were essentially playing these games are simply showing that they are being more competitive or more willing to be aggressive in their play. But notice there's no relationship here to real world aggression.
Right, exactly. And there's also a link. I think there's a similar thing you could say about this, to say that these people that have just been taught a new game to play are going to be a little bit more confident about just pressing buttons at all.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So here's another button for you to press. What does this do? Oh, it causes this noise to happen in my opponent's ears.
The more you're used to, let's say, gaming in general, right? Yeah, the more you're used to just another button.
Yeah, and same deal. Like I'm sure you've taught, an elder great aunt or something how to use a computer, and they're very hesitant to press any button at all.
Right.
Because they're not confident with technology. And they may not be, these people that they tested may not have been confident with gaming as a technology. And so just teaching them a new game would make them a little bit more confident and make them more likely to press a button.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so that's where things are, right, on the aggressive front, right? So,
or I should say that's where things were like 10 years ago on the aggression front.
Yes, right. These days, so let's look at the kind of issues that they're talking about, right? Our one possible, let's talk about the possible analogs, right? Tobacco kills people, right? Or actually, let's do that second, right? Tobacco kills other people through secondhand smoke.
Oh, okay.
Do video games result in death to others? I mean, as far as we know there, right? No. That one's clear, right?
Yeah,
so
very clear.
as long as we're separating aggression from violence, right? We got no link to violence whatsoever as far as video games are now.
Right.
Right. And I always like to talk about how, Manhunter 2042,
Right.
in VR, right? Who knows what the future will bring, right?
That's right.
Okay, then you have this other issue about, now tobacco kills, right, its users, right? Do video games kill players?
Well, in the sense, the physical, there's a physical argument that video games can kill you by overplaying them because you may forget to eat, or there was that fellow in China that was in the or Korea, I think, I forget now, who was at the video game cafe and passed away while he'd been playing. He'd been playing there for like 26 or 30 hours and died in his chair.
Right. So there's been a few of those, right?
There's been a few of those sorts of issues, right? And was it the video game that killed them in the same way that tobacco kills people with cancer? No, it's not the same.
Well, it's interesting, right? Certainly there's no direct correlation, right? It's not like the video game shot you dead.
Right. It's not that the video game, instilled a virus through your eyes and fingertips.
But, let's say if the video game essentially entranced you, right?
Sure.
In a way that you could not pull away. This guy was playing for, so there's a few of them, but let's say I think the most famous ones are from Taipei.
Right. This is a similar argument than that people have about the flashing lights and the people who might have an epileptic seizure from the way that the lights flash on the screen.
I always assume that does happen every once in a while.
It does happen every once in a while. And for the large part, the industry does what it can to not have that sort of flashing light that might cause an epileptic seizure. Because there's certainly a lot more epileptics than there are people who will die in a gaming cafe.
Right. Definitely. And and you get warnings about
right.
this
and
in lots of games
about these things. Right. Sure.
Still, just to I remember that the first case I heard of in Taipei, and there was I think 2 cases in like a year apart. And still notice, right, a year apart, right? That's still pretty rare, right? But there was really something to it because I remember reading about it, and here you have a guy that stayed in the cafe for 5 days, and this is in Asia where people will spend very long periods of time in internet cafes playing games where they can get food. It's very comfortable. A lot of times they're playing with friends. It's a very different sort of play than the way it's done in the West, where you're very commonly at home.
Right.
So
or if you think about it, and if you're imagining like, oh, it's a cafe, but you can play games there. Cafes are very different here too.
Right.
Like you can't stay there the whole time. People do come in, at the Starbucks and camp out and put their laptops up and use Starbucks Wi-Fi.
Right.
But, it's not the same. You're not it's not very comfortable to do that.
No, and it's it's weird even calling these places internet cafes anymore, right? They're gaming centers.
Right.
Where you have row after row after row of people gaming, right?
Right.
They're the modern arcade, in much better analog to what arcade maybe used to be. So here you are in this arcade, and this person, or in this whatever, and this person is essentially ends up dead, right? And the police come, and the police are just amazed because no one stops. Everybody keeps playing. This is just shocking. The police reporting how they felt about what was going on. I think it's really easy to understand how someone can look at these people who are, people are dying next to them, and they see the
person
police.
has died next to them.
Okay, a person. Fair enough.
Yeah,
a person,
let's not multiply this by 2
Sure.
immediately just by the way we use language.
Fair enough. A person has died next to them, and they're essentially. They might look up once the police came, but anything else that people do, they would stop. But these people instead are just going back to their game, right? Now, maybe they're on a raid. Maybe it's scheduled. Maybe all these people are counting on them.
Or maybe,
But I mean,
or
a
maybe
person just died.
something happened over there. We don't know what it was. The police are involved. They seem to have it under control.
Maybe.
I'm going to go back to my game.
Maybe.
It's easy. It's so easy for me to imagine that, though.
Really?
Yeah.
To me, a bunch of people die, an ambulance is going to come. They're going to take this guy out on a gurney.
How do you know that they've died?
Well, I'm assuming all the attention, the ambulance coming to pick him up, all the things, all the things that happen when you take away a dead body. Even if they didn't die, even if this person is just, all the attention you would think would get you to leave your game.
Right.
If you are, a typical person, and again,
if I was sitting around, if I was sitting in a place playing a game, let's say I was in an arcade, and somebody at the next machine keeled over. First off, if I noticed it, I would of course lend aid if I could. But if the first time I noticed it was because the ambulance has arrived and they're putting him on a gurney and covering him with a sheet, what am I going to do? Go back to my game.
Well, again, I don't know. Most people in most contexts, and again, you might be thinking about this as a gamer. I think most people in most contexts would pay more attention. But okay, so let's leave this one behind.
I'd be curious about what happened to him.
The guy?
Yeah.
If
I was there,
right? You're like, did he die?
I might ask around. Clearly he's dead, right? We're seeing them being covered up. I might ask what happened to him, and I know even as I ask, I'm not going to get a good response
because the people around you won't exactly know.
They won't know.
Okay, so here's our third one, right? Tobacco's addictive. Are video games addictive?
Right. Now, so that's something I have a lot more to say about than like the violence thing is such a non-issue for me. But this addiction thing is something that I've been even back then, because I remember we had a guy named a California state senator named Leland Yee who was raising alarms about video game violence as early as like 1999. And I remember thinking at the time that he's barking up the wrong tree altogether. He should really be talking about addiction. And so let me read you a quote from Leland Yee.
Okay.
Gamers have no credibility in this argument. This is all about their lust for violence and their industry's lust for money. This is a billion-dollar industry. This is about their self-interest. So this was something he wrote in like 2003, I think.
The lust for violence.
Lust for violence and for money.
Grandpa Yee.
So here's the deal about Leland Yee. Leland Yee was just released from prison in 2020.
Okay.
After serving a sentence for, among other things, gun trafficking.
Okay.
He was caught buying machine guns from an Islamist extremist group in the Philippines and selling to what happened to be an undercover FBI agent.
Okay.
So this is the guy. This is the guy raising the alarm about violent video games.
Right.
And supposedly bringing these guns in to the United States to sell for use here in the U.S.
Right.
So talk about no credibility in an argument, right? I mean, that's what they always throw the children up for cover, right? Think about the children. Think about the children that are going to be harmed by this, right?
Okay. So
I got nothing for that guy.
Putting Yee behind us, right? All right. Notice what we have here, right? Obviously, everybody knows how addictive tobacco is, right? Clearly, video games are addictive as well. Well, though, it's not really clear, and we're going to do a future episode that we've got lined up about addiction. But the World Health Organization declared video game addiction to be a psychological disorder a couple years ago.
Right.
The American Psychological Association has essentially so far, they've been reviewing it, for I think almost 10 years.
Yeah.
They still can't make up their mind.
Yeah, they have it listed as a possible addiction.
Right. And the question is not kind of, can you get in? the question is not can you get addicted to video games, because you can get addicted to anything.
Sure.
So it's more like, is video games a particular type of addiction?
Or
I think
is there
that's
is there something about video games that makes them more addictive than other things might be?
Sure. Though, yeah, whatever, right? More addictive than, let's say, watching crime dramas on TV nonstop, right? Which potentially you could get addicted to anything.
Right. So I think it's useful to talk about and sort of explain the concept of executive function.
Okay.
So executive function is a feature of our brains, right? That basically allows us to decide what to do and how to do it. So when we basically plan out our day, or we plan out our hour, or even if we plan out, setting the table for dinner, all of these things are things that we make use of the executive function to do. It includes short and long-term memory, the ability to make plans, flexible thinking, the ability to adjust our plans on the fly, and self-control, ability to stick to the plans that we've made, given other things that might be distracting to us. Executive function. I'm sorry. Yeah. Did you want to interject?
I'm so tired, and I'm tired because, all right. So I was playing Civilization last night, and I played till 1 a.m. And I have now a way. So I start playing, and I try to give myself a limit of how long I'm going to play.
Right.
And then I passed that limit by an hour, and then I passed that limit by 2 hours. And this is my executive function failing.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I found a way kind of around that. I play on my laptop away from my room and away from the power control, so that eventually my laptop will die.
Oh, okay. So
and that's kind of a way of getting around it.
Right. You've used that as a way to basically shore up your executive function.
Yeah, I don't know if that even counts, but sure, right?
Sure.
I know my executive function is
because you planned
failing.
it. You planned it.
Right.
It's a thing that you did to make it so that you would not be able to keep playing, just because and games do this to us, very easily, right? So, one of the things that games do, there's sort of two things that I think games do that are potentially sort of things to worry about, right? When we're playing video games, give us these streams of little tiny tasks. It's like, I can just do this last thing to do, right? And then right after that, there's one more little thing to do, and right after that, there's one more little thing to do.
Yep.
And you're smiling now, and because I suspect that's exactly what happened last night.
It's exactly what happened last night.
One little thing to do, one little thing to do. And these tiny tasks like that themselves do not. They're satisfying, right? They're internally satisfying.
They make me feel like there's purpose to everything that I'm doing.
And your executive function doesn't feel a threat to them because each one is so small.
Right.
Right. I can still get 8 hours of sleep. I'm just going to do this last thing. I can still get 8 hours of sleep. I can still get 8 hours of sleep. I can still get 8 hours
or
of sleep.
7 hours or
and
6
now 7
hours or 5
sleep,
hours.
Right. So that's a way that games can hack our executive function. And another way that games sort of hack our executive function is because when we're playing these games, the games themselves are designed to make us feel seen, they make us feel understood, and they make us feel appreciated.
Mm. And
right, because the game is so centered around you. It's everything it's doing is because of you. When we're not playing the game, we may not feel so seen and understood and appreciated in our everyday life. And we might long to get back to that. Like, do you want to play right now?
Of course. I actually, though, I actually want to play with my son because my son really wants to play.
Oh, yeah.
And, but I know that part of it is taking my craving for the game and giving it a justification. In this case, not a bad justification. I feel my son is learning.
Yeah, that's fun. That's good dad and kid time, right?
And he's learning so much from Civilization. I mean, Civilization is such a smart game.
Mm-hmm.
But to go back, the other thing is just the sense of achievement, the sense that you're fulfilling something, where it's so hard to feel often success in so many aspects of life.
That's right.
Now,
It's a hack, but that's what it is. It's a hack of our executive function.
Okay. Now, addiction, I feel like addiction doesn't get that much attention in the United States, right? But in places like South Korea and China, it is just huge.
Yeah.
Right. So, the South Korean government in particular, right, does tons and tons of things about this. It's estimated that about 10% of all teenagers, according to the South Korean government, are internet addicts, with boys tending to be more game addicts and girls tending to be more social media addicts.
Right.
But I mean, 10% is a lot. They have
That's a lot.
They have over 200 clinics all around the country that are established and paid for by the government to help people stop their gaming addiction.
Right.
They're staffed by therapists. The government does research on this. Teachers and parents are taught to look for the signs of game addiction. They have PSAs, right, commercials on it. They have school assemblies about it, right? I mean, it's there's literally 8 different government ministries.
And you figure that teenagers in South Korea, probably every single one of them is playing games.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're looking at is, as out of 100% of the demographic tested, 10% of them are addicted to video games or social media.
Right. Well,
and I guess there's a similar study in the U.S. that took a sort of a broader approach that found that 1% between 1% and 9% of all adults suffer from this as well. So, and in the U.S., if you take a sampling of all adults, you're going to get a lot of people who don't play video games.
Right.
So
right.
that would mean that the numbers would be smaller.
Sorry, I should say in South Korea it was internet game addiction. So it wasn't just internet.
Okay.
It was game addiction.
Right.
But before we go back to the U.S., the other interesting one that I found was a psychologist at Gangnam Yulji Hospital in Seoul essentially said that video game addiction is essentially 90% of addiction cases in South Korea.
Wow.
Right? They clearly don't have the opioid epidemic, right? That we have,
or alcoholism.
Right? Well, of course they have alcoholism and they drink very heavily, right, in South Korea. But that it's that pervasive, which is, I mean, South Korea is also a culture where it could be intensely stressful to be a teen. I mean, you go to school and then you go to night school because they have a super, super competitive school system, which you need to do well in order to pass to do well in the equivalent to the SAT, but much more important in order to to get to college, and your future depends on it. So almost everybody goes to a night school beside the regular school, and you can see how they can relax with a video game, right? So that's the idea. Now, from what I understand, I recently read a study that they kind of did this big study with like a meta study where they talked to 200 experts on this in the field about this, and they concluded that the numbers were like about 3 to 4 for in general for places like the United States, in terms of 3-4% of video game players are addicts, with it being, let's say, a couple percentage points higher in Asia, right? And then you want to ask yourself, right? Is 3-4 to 4% a lot or little?
No, it's a lot.
I mean,
it's a lot. To be sure, it's absolutely a lot. But we should also, I think it's also important to say, for the sake of our readers who may play a lot of video games, that you don't need to be, you may not be an addict just because you play a lot. Playing a lot and addiction and being addicted to it are separate. They're different things.
Right. So, the shorthand, and so there's something called excessive play. And excessive play just means you're playing too much. And notice excessive play could mean that you're playing too much to the point where, okay, maybe you're not addicted necessarily, but you could be messing up your, school or work prospects.
Right. Anytime that when it comes down to like, is it stopping you from being able to do the things in your life that you otherwise want or need to do?
Right. Though it's interesting, right? Is it stopping you, or are you making a choice in some way? But if we're going to make it, on the definitions of addiction, right? They're
Yeah.
pretty clear that it's a persistent habit, that it harms you, and you recognize that it harms you, and you keep going anyway, and it continues to harm you, right? And I
Right.
think it's 12 months is how long this has to go before you're officially considered an addict, right? So
That's too long. I mean,
agree.
I mean, I don't think
Mm.
that. Yeah, I think that it could probably set in much faster than that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's way too long.
We shouldn't have to wait a year to find out if we've lost a year of our lives. How about?
Though it's interesting again, maybe they're trying to be conservative here, right? In order to not raise the alarm too much, because there is a worry with the addiction thing, right? That you can create a moral panic. You can essentially get people to worry so much about video games that essentially, people, in this case, let's say we're talking about kids, but really people, right? I mean, plenty
Right.
of adults are addicted to video games, will miss out on all the good that video game has, right?
Right.
Of which there is plenty.
For sure.
Okay, so do we have an analog here then between tobacco and video games when it comes to addiction?
Not at all. See, that's the part where I feel like it's a very different thing. Just because with tobacco, there is, in addition to whatever social and psychological factors go into your addiction with that, there is a chemical addiction. There's a chemical in your system that as you withdraw, you start to feel physical pain. You start to feel physical and emotional distress when you start to go through with your withdrawal. And the only thing, and your executive function will tell you this, and again, this is why it's a different kind of hack. Your executive function knows, and so you set up all these plans to get, that the only thing that can relieve this pain is to get another cigarette.
Okay.
And games don't do that. Games don't do that chemically.
Well, unless you count everything in your brain being chemical, right? I mean, don't you
Yes.
don't you need that feeling of satisfaction of logging back into the game if you're addicted?
So what you're talking about is dopamine. And there's
I like dopamine.
there's a lot of misunderstanding around how dopamine works. There's a lot. I mean, the sort of pseudoscience that you read about is, every time something good happens to you, you get a dopamine hit. And that's not actually how dopamine works. I've got some information about that here. From Celia Hodin. Celia Hodin is a French writer about video games, and she's got an excellent article called "Ethics in the Video Game Industry." She talks about this as part of the article. When we want such reward, dopamine. So dopamine kicks in when we start wanting a reward. So it trickles into our system. Dopamine slowly released into the brain to motivate us, which is overall useful since we have survived so far by seeking good outcomes and avoiding pain, right? So this is actually our brains doing the right thing, saying, like, when you want something, you're starting to get a little hit of dopamine when you want it. We get a bigger hit of dopamine when we don't expect to get a reward and we get one anyway. So the surprise birthday party gives us a much bigger hit of dopamine in a much faster way. And she quotes this neuroscientist, Dr. Mark Humphreys, who says, dopamine neurons do not fire when you get something good. That's the misunderstanding. They fire when you get something unexpected, and they sulk if you don't get something you do expect.
God, I would think that video games are full of unexpected rewards.
Absolutely.
Right.
But also expected rewards, like the things that you covet and you work towards, slowly working your dopamine up.
So let me ask you this. So are we talking about difference in kind or degree? Because if I'm addicted,
no,
right,
because cigarettes do the same thing.
So
your desire for a cigarette is slowly releasing dopamine into your system as you think about the next cigarette you're going to have, as you're starting to covet that next cigarette. I love coveting things. Coveting things is one of my favorite things to do. That's where your dopamine is getting introduced into your system. It's that moment when you finally light up, that's not the big dopamine hit.
Right.
It's been slowly growing while you're wanting it.
Right. Okay. So look,
in that sense, dopamine, video games don't do anything any more than say, looking forward to tomorrow's episode of WandaVision.
except that, they are being triggered in a consistent way. So these kind of looking forward to is something that, we're pushed into a lot. And when I say pushed into, I mean, by our brain, right? To keep wanting in some way. So let me ask you about this. So we agree that they are addictive, right?
Yeah,
but
of course.
clearly they're not addictive in exactly the same way.
Right.
And clearly, obviously, the consequences of
Right.
those addictions are not the same way, right? I mean,
Right,
if you're
But
addicted,
you asked me
Mm.
whether it was an analog to tobacco, and I don't think it is, because tobacco is doubly addictive. It has everything that video games do, plus chemistry.
okay. Though again, I'm just gonna say yes, but that's just another reinforcement for addiction, right? So again, if it's still, to me, right, adding a physical addiction is just adding yet another kind of addiction on top of it. We still have addiction and addiction, but two different kinds of addiction.
Sure, but I mean, then are you addicted to dinner?
Again,
you look forward to it. You get if you get an unexpected cupcake, you get you get a big hit of dopamine.
Yeah, cupcakes won't do that for me, right? Not for a man my age, right? But okay. Let's keep going past this. So
Okay.
here's the next one I got for you, right? For our potential analog. Tobacco companies famously target kids, right?
Yes.
So the Joe Tobacco thing, right? Tobacco companies. Look, tobacco companies. One of the things that makes this analogy with tobacco so potentially infuriating, if you're a game designer, is that, I mean, God, is there a bigger villain than Big Tobacco? I mean, the history of Big Tobacco is just horrendous.
Right.
And one of those things included, so if there's no business you want to be compared to less than Big Tobacco.
Right.
And one of the things that they were famous for, right, is how they targeted kids for cigarettes ahead of time. Right.
And still do. All right. So first off, I'll tell you about what I find in the trash that I find in the alleyway behind my house.
Okay.
Grape and watermelon flavored cigarette wrappers.
Wait, that's legal? I mean, didn't they make even flavored vape illegal?
They did.
But you can buy separate
you can buy
cigarette wrappers to roll your own?
To roll your own in candy flavors. Who is that for? Who is that for?
Wow, that is for a teenage girl. I mean, yeah. I mean, to be very specific, right?
Right. It's for kids.
Right.
Right.
That is that's super interesting.
Even with all of this, even with all this legislation, they're still making stuff. Now they're not able to advertise them, so God knows how these kids are finding out. But kids are finding out.
Word of mouth for a product that that suits your demographic.
Yep.
Right. I mean, and the same obviously goes for vaping, which much more specifically try to do that. Now, do video game companies ever do that? Target kids for products that are made for adults. So let's say maybe the analogy would be, if I got GTA 5, do video companies ever target GTA 5 at kids?
So interestingly, we know that kids don't see themselves as young as they are. Or I should say, when they buy things, when they want things that the older kids want. Right. So kids are not necessarily a very good indicator, like the things that they desire and the things that they want. They are always aspiring forward.
Right.
So we know that. in terms of the kinds of gameplay that we are making, when we're targeting a 12-year-old, we know that we should make it look like something that the 12-year-old thinks that the 15-year-old would like.
Okay.
Does that make
Right.
sense?
Sure.
Right. So we're targeting a 12-year-old. We make it look like something that the 12-year-old might think that the 15-year-old would like. But of course, the 15-year-old is going to like something that the 18-year-old likes.
Right.
So there's you can't just keep, it's not an iterative loop.
Okay. So if I am is the assumption then being made if I make my GTA 5 let's say ads targeted at 18-year-olds as opposed to, let's say, 30-year-olds, right? I can already count on the teenage market kind of buying in because they want what the 18-year-olds have. I don't need to target the teenage market directly in any way.
Correct.
And I don't. And am I not concerning myself with anyone younger? I'm not concerning myself with the 12-year-olds because they don't have as much interest in those games anyway, or I've already captured enough of the market incidentally.
Right. It might be, what, I'm not sure about how, like, that gets into specifics of marketing that I'm not too aware of, but
Sure.
Certainly as a game designer, we are not thinking about our market that way.
Okay.
So we're targeting a very specific thing, and we're not going to be worried. Now, we might be worried that we might say this is not appropriate for somebody under 13, like
Right.
like Facebook would say, and so that would probably go on the box somewhere.
Right.
And we would be very clear about that to our marketing department and to everybody involved that we're making a game. This is a mature title.
Right.
This is a title for teenagers. It should not be marketed to kids.
Okay. And so definitely no candy flavored
Right. No
papers,
candy.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What about this? And to me, this is the most interesting, right, of it all. Tobacco companies, the most evil thing that tobacco companies did is to manipulate their product, right? So they intentionally made cigarettes as addictive as possible, right?
Right.
They messed around with
Sure.
they studied the amount of nicotine, the amount of chemicals that would go in. Their aim was to create a customer for life.
Right.
And then they hid this, right?
Right.
They hid this fact from everybody. So I guess these are kind of two questions for this analog, right? Do video game companies, or do some video game companies try to create addicts out of their players? And then secondly, do they hide that fact?
Well, I think everybody is trying. But one of the other reasons why I don't think tobacco is a good analog is because in the case of tobacco, they succeeded. And because there was a handful of big tobacco companies, they all had the secret sauce, and they were competing against each other for who could make their secret sauce better. We haven't figured out a secret sauce. Like, there are games that have a lot of really, really dodgy mechanics and features in them that are very successful, and there are just next to them games that don't have any of those features that are also really successful.
Right.
And if we knew why that was true, we'd all be billionaires. But we haven't figured it out
Yet.
Right?
Or
Yet.
yet.
I think that there are some things. I have a list of things that are potentially things that I would consider questionable in any sort of media, whether it's games or other things, right? And I could list those off, and if we have time. I know we're getting close on time.
Yeah, and I want to save those for another time.
Oh, okay. That's fair.
There's a lot of, we had one episode on manipulation already, right? And I want to have many more. So I want to kind of save those for like a fuller discussion. But notice the way you put it is, right, the analogs are still, the attempt is there, but not the success. You're saying as far as that goes.
Right. We haven't figured out how to do what chemistry can do.
Right. Or, again, not yet. And also, we talked about at some point, right? We talked about in our one manipulation, how the idea is to get them to do what you want, but to not let them know that you're getting them to do what they want, right? So far, at least there, to me, that is an analog, just not a successful analog, right? The attempt is there, the success isn't there.
Sure. Yeah.
Or
yeah.
at least to some degree.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Now,
so there is before we quit though, and I don't know what I sort of feel like we're wrapping up.
I have two more.
Okay. I just have some things to do. If you think that you are addicted to gaming, I have some things for you to try. First off, as you tried to do last night, set and keep limits to your playtime. That didn't work for you last night. I'm not suggesting you're an addict, but I just want to I want to emphasize that because we can all feel that, right? We all understand how that might work.
Right.
And if we were addicted, we could see how that could really blow up in our faces. Put the gaming devices away when you're done. Don't leave them handy, and definitely don't keep them next to your bed. If you want to play, make sure
when a game is on your phone.
Right. If you want to play, well, I keep my phone plugged in the kitchen. And if I want to play the games in the morning, I have to get up, go to the kitchen, get my game, get my phone, go back to bed, which is what normally happens.
Right.
But at least it gets me up.
Right.
Make sure you have to get up to get your device. Take breaks for exercise. Exercise just by itself improves your cognitive functions. So, and then of course, the real health risk to gaming is things like deep vein thrombosis and other things that can be real health problems for sitting too long.
Yeah.
So get up. And when you play games, play with your friends. That requires planning, or your son. It requires planning, setting aside time. This is all executive function. All this strengthens your executive function feature. When they need to stop playing, then you can as well. Don't keep playing with randos, if you're playing online.
Right.
And then finally, a lot of people have found cognitive behavior therapy to be very, very useful in all kinds of addictive behaviors. So that's something you can learn from a mental health counselor.
I'm really big on cognitive behavior therapy.
Me too.
I've benefited greatly from it. I want to kind of thank you for giving us that, Andy.
Our brief PSA.
I want to ask you then, because it is interesting. This one thing. This is going to be our last analog. One thing that the tobacco industry did not do, right, is take any responsibility for decades for anything that was happening. Right. Yeah. Essentially, it says, look, this is all consumers. This is all their choice. This is all their problem. Right. Never mind that they were trying to create addicts, etc. There's a lot of things, right? So some of these ideas that you said, these are practices that you can do. Obviously, there's also practices that you can do potentially within a game, right? So some games allow you to set a limit, right, for how much you can play or how much you can spend, and lots of other kind of limits. So there are things that can be done, but of course, a game that does that is in some ways going against the whole purpose of getting you addicted in the first place, right?
Except that it may not be. That's the thing that I'm trying to. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that that game might be just as and we should probably stop using the word addictive, because we don't really mean that anymore. We mean what we're trying to do in game design is we're trying to make what's the word that Celia Hodon uses? It's so good. We're trying to make games sticky.
Okay.
We want you to come back and play, but we don't want you to come back to a degree that it's unhealthy for you. Now there are it's a huge industry with millions and millions of people in it. I'm not speaking for everybody. There are going to be some people who are going to be like, no. We want to addict people to our games,
right?
In the strongest possible words, in every possible way that you can mean addiction, we would like to addict people to our games. But as a whole, what's different about you were talking about industry wide now. What's different is, as an industry, we are both open about the struggle, and we're also open about the ways that we can make games and that are respectful. What we're talking about, and this is There's a whole nother conversation about the attention economy and being respectful of players' attention as well as their money. So there's all these laws about, for monetization, we talked about monetization, being respectful of people's money. There are also ethical rules that we should be following for how to be respectful of their attention.
Okay. And you would describe essentially the video game industry as being respectful of their attention in this way, or is it all over the place?
Well, what I'm saying is that the industry, unlike the tobacco industry, which when they were doing their chemical research, that was all in secret, and
Right.
it was all it was not discussed. This is all discussed out in the open. So not only because it's really easy to find out what we're doing, but it's also easy to see that we're not all on board, and we're not all doing the same things.
Right. It's interesting, right? Because one very big difference between the video game and tobacco industry is, when we say big tobacco, I mean, there were literally 5 or 7 companies that were like 90% of tobacco.
Yeah,
right.
It's very small.
Right. In video games, you have just so many developers. It's just so different. And the conversations that video game companies have is so much more public
Right.
about these things. Okay, then let's end it on that. Okay?
Sounds great.
Play nice. You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.